This interview was a masterclass in toe-curling embarrassment. And one of the reasons that was so magnified was the fact that Andrew did not seem aware of how badly he was coming across. There was no kind of self-filter for him. And the reason for that were his signals of smug arrogance, authority, this kind of slightly pompous royal look that he was putting across, that he obviously thought, people have fallen for this all of my life, and it's going to be the same walk in the park here. We got at least 6 signals that helped to create that. Number one, he was using what's called the power steeple with his hands, and he was doing that from the start. And this is a gesture, when you steeple with the thumbs or the fingers, it implies superiority, it implies authority, high status. And at one point, he started tapping the fingertips together as well. And that's a precision gesture that also implies a little bit of impatience. He had a very solid eye contact for quite a lot of the interview, certainly at the start. And he was using, an index finger is always a signal of authority, but he was using it like a conductor would use a baton. He was conducting the whole thing with his finger. At one point, he even starts using it almost as though he's sewing a tapestry in the air. The smug smile that is very much an Andrew trademark look. And even verbally, he frequently used the phrase, you've got to remember.
You have to remember that I was transitioning out of the Navy at the time.
And again, that's an authoritative phrase. It's a pompous phrase. You must do this. So many of those signals, I think, were what made the whole interview even worse, if that was possible, because that idea of the lack of self-awareness. I think Andrew was expecting the whole thing to be a walk in the park. It was about 6 minutes in before Emily started to become more forensic. And I think there's a look in his eye that, is this where we're going?
Just for the record, you've been on his private plane.
Yes.
You've been to stay on his private island.
Yes.
You've stayed at his home in Palm Beach.
Yes.
You've visited Ghislaine Maxwell's house in Belgravia in London.
Yes.
So in 2006, in May, an arrest warrant was issued for Epstein.
She took on a tone that was a bit more like a courtroom drama, and she actually used the phrase "just for the record," which I think scares everybody. She got a volley of one-word affirmations from him then, but then she said the phrase in 2006 in May. And already at that point, you can see his body language begin to take on a pretty seismic shift. You get an exaggerated eye roll, as though I wasn't expecting that. He looks a lot less assured. He touches his face. He looks away. But he comes up with some very interesting stories to questions that are almost unanswerable. Why did you stay at Epstein's house within the months of his release from jail?
Why were you staying with a convicted sex offender?
Right. I've questioned myself as to why did I go, what was I doing, and was it the right thing to do?
Andrew was like a student in an exam that studied, they've swatted that answer. He always looked, oh yes, I know this one. He actually uses the word, right, tilts his head back and to one side, again, with a look of arrogance. When we lift our chin, we're looking down our nose at people. And then he uses this almost word salad line. I went to tell him that it was inappropriate for us to be seen together. So I went to be seen with him to tell him that it was... he lets out a huge sigh. And then his reasoning for staying in Epstein's house, it was a convenient place to stay, which I think draws across the nation. He shakes his head, he closes his eyes. No big deal. He had one easy question. which was, do you regret your friendship with Epstein? And I think most people have probably gone to get a cup of tea at that point, because she's saying, he's going to say, yes, it's an easy one. Of course I do.
Do you regret the whole friendship with Epstein?
Now, still not.
But it was kind of his PF moment. There was a pause, and I actually felt my toes begin to, why are you delaying your answer? What is there to think about at this point? He seems to be evaluating the question. We get a huge intake of breaths, which appears to stall for time. And again, this is getting really painful to watch. His head kind of sinks into his neck and shoulders, and then he tilts his head and frowns as though he's really struggling with the question. It's extraordinary body language. We get verbal stutters, and then now, still not. He doesn't regret it. And that's when we get the index finger then starts doing this tapestry of sowing justified excuses in the air as to why he actually doesn't regret it. Quite shocking with the no sweat line. It was almost like his sick note for why he wasn't dancing in Tramp with Virginia. It wasn't a kind of, no, I wouldn't do anything like that. It was a kind of, aha. He looked quite wily at that point. You know, I've got my answer on this one. He says, I don't sweat, but then he quickly adds, I would imagine in case a little bead came down his face at that point, I didn't sweat.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
He doesn't even stop there. He kind of turns it into, this is a trait he had all the way through. He doesn't just try to be explaining things to clear himself. He also adds a little PR opportunity thing. You know, I can remind them how wonderful I am at the same time. So he says, you know, he reminds us that he was a war hero. You know, the reason why he didn't sweat was because he'd been shot at in the Falklands War, you know, and we actually get his hand forms into a noble fist and his lower jaw juts to show, you know, this is the person that you're daring to criticise. I am a hero.
I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply it was almost impossible for me to sweat.
So he kind of takes it to a stage, but then even further to kind of buff and hone his own image to make himself sound even more wonderful. Andrew gets to the point where he decides to deliver a sex education session. It's very much done in that tone. He becomes very educational, very authoritative. His brows are raised. I'm going to tell you something that you might not know right now. And this is why he would not have forgotten sex with Virginia. And again, a word salad comes out. If you are a man, it is a positive act to have sex with somebody. You have to take some positive action.
If you're a man, it is a positive act to have sex with somebody.
If you try to forget it, it is very difficult. And then a cold stare a real royal cold stare at the end. Subject closed.